What if everything we believe about human history is completely backwards? What if the story of our species isn't one of gradual progress from primitive cave dwellers to modern civilization, but something far stranger and more unsettling? What if 150,000 years ago, our ancestors possessed knowledge of physics that we're only beginning to rediscover today? This isn't about ancient aliens or mystical powers. This is about a possibility so radical that it challenges the very foundation of how we understand human development. Because when you look closely at the timeline of our species, when you examine the gaps in our knowledge and the anomalies that don't quite fit, a disturbing pattern begins to emerge. Modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. We've had the same brain capacity, the same cognitive abilities for all of that time. Yet we're told that meaningful technological advancement only began around 12,000 years ago with agriculture. That leaves nearly 290,000 years of human existence that we call prehistory, as if nothing important happened during that vast expanse of time. But what if something extraordinary did happen? What if there were periods when human understanding reached heights that we can barely imagine today? What if advanced knowledge of physics, mathematics, and engineering flourished in civilizations that have since been erased by time, leaving behind only the faintest traces of their existence? The evidence isn't hiding in dusty museums or secret government files. It's scattered throughout our archaeological record, our mythology, and even our DNA. But we've been looking at it all wrong, interpreting anomalies as curiosities rather than clues to a much deeper mystery. By the end of this exploration, you'll understand why mainstream archaeology might be missing the most important chapter in human history, and why the implications of this possibility could reshape everything we think we know about our past and our future. Most of us learned in school that human civilization follows a neat, linear progression. Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, leading up to our modern technological society. It's a comforting narrative because it places us at the pinnacle of human achievement. We're the smart ones. We're the advanced ones. Everyone who came before us was primitive by comparison. But this timeline has a fundamental problem. It's based on what archaeologists call the preservation bias. We find what survives, not necessarily what existed. Stone tools last for millennia. Bronze weapons can endure for thousands of years. But what about materials that decompose? What about technologies that leave no permanent trace? What about knowledge that was transmitted orally or through methods we haven't learned to recognize? Consider this uncomfortable fact. The human brain reached its current size and complexity around 200,000 years ago. That brain was capable of abstract thought, complex problem solving, and communication. It was the same organ that eventually produced Einstein, Tesla, and Hawking. Yet we're expected to believe that for the vast majority of human existence, this incredible biological computer was used only for hunting, gathering, and making simple tools. The math doesn't add up. If human intelligence has remained essentially constant for 200,000 years, then the potential for advanced thinking, for breakthrough discoveries, for revolutionary insights about the nature of reality existed throughout that entire period. Intelligence isn't something that suddenly switched on 5,000 years ago when we started writing things down. It was there all along, waiting to be unleashed. But here's where it gets interesting. When we examine the archaeological record more carefully, when we look beyond the standard narrative, we find hints that human capability might have peaked and declined multiple times throughout history. We find evidence of knowledge that seems impossibly advanced for its supposed time period. We find gaps that suggest entire chapters of human development have been lost to time. The problem is that most archaeologists and historians are trained to interpret anomalies conservatively. When they find something that doesn't fit the established timeline, the default assumption is that it must have a conventional explanation. Technique is attributed to lucky accidents. A complex structure is explained away as the work of later civilizations. This conservative approach makes sense from a scientific standpoint. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But what happens when the conservative explanations become more far-fetched than the radical ones? What happens when the anomalies pile up so high that the standard timeline starts to crumble under their weight? That's where we find ourselves today. Because once you start questioning the linear progression model, you allow for the possibility that human knowledge once has risen and fallen multiple times. Everything changes. Suddenly those impossible artifacts make sense. Those gaps in the archaeological record become meaningful. Those myths about golden ages and forgotten wisdom start to sound less like fantasy and more like racial memory. The key insight is this: advanced knowledge doesn't require advanced materials. Some of the most profound breakthroughs in physics and mathematics require nothing more than human intelligence and careful observation. The ancient Greeks discovered principles of geometry that we still use today. They calculated the circumference of the Earth using nothing but shadows and basic math. They theorized about atoms, planetary motion, and the fundamental nature of reality. If that level of insight was possible 2,500 years ago, what might have been possible 25,000 years ago, or 50,000 years ago, or 150,000 years ago? The human brain hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is our assumption about when that genius was first unleashed. And this brings us to the most intriguing possibility of all. What if the greatest minds in human history weren't recent additions to our species? What if they lived tens of thousands of years ago, making discoveries that we're only now beginning to understand? What if they unlocked secrets of physics that we've forgotten and are slowly rediscovering? The implications are staggering. It would mean that human civilization is cyclical rather than linear. It would mean that we're not the first to probe the deepest mysteries of the universe. It would mean that knowledge we think of as cutting edge might actually be ancient wisdom, preserved in fragments and waiting to be reassembled. To understand how this could be possible, we need to examine something that most people never think about: the lifespan of knowledge itself. How long does information survive? How does it get transmitted? And what happens when the chain of transmission breaks? In our modern world, we take the persistence of knowledge for granted. We have books, databases, digital storage, and institutional memory. But strip away those support systems, and even the most sophisticated understanding can vanish within a generation or two. The knowledge exists in human minds, but if those minds can't pass it on effectively, it dies with them. This is exactly what happens during civilizational collapse, and human history is full of such collapses. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE erased entire writing systems and technological traditions. The fall of the Roman Empire led to centuries of lost engineering knowledge. The burning of the Library of Alexandria destroyed countless works of ancient science and mathematics. But these are just the collapses we know about. How many others have been lost to time? How many periods of advanced knowledge have been completely erased from the record? If a civilization fell 100,000 years ago, what traces would remain today? The answer is disturbing. Very few, if any. Organic materials decompose, stone structures erode, metal corrodes and returns to the earth. even the most sophisticated technologies would crumble and disappear, leaving behind only the faintest chemical signatures in rock layers. Without writing, without permanent monuments, without materials designed to last millennia, an entire advanced civilization could vanish as if it never existed. This is the dark possibility that mainstream archaeology doesn't want to confront. Not because there's a conspiracy, but because it's professionally and intellectually uncomfortable. If advanced knowledge could have emerged and disappeared multiple times throughout human history, then our entire understanding of human development needs to be reconsidered. But the evidence for this cyclical model is hiding in plain sight. It's embedded in our mythology, our language, our DNA, and even our unconscious behaviors. Humans across every culture tell stories of golden ages, of times when gods walked among mortals, of forgotten wisdom that was lost to catastrophe. These aren't just fantasies, they're memories encoded in cultural DNA, passed down through countless generations. The Hindu concept of yugas describes vast cycles of time where knowledge and virtue rise and fall. The Greek myth of the Golden Age speaks of a time when humans possessed divine wisdom. Aboriginal Australians tell of the dream time, when the ancestors established the laws that govern reality itself. Norse mythology describes Ragnarok as the end of one world cycle and the beginning of another. These stories share common themes that are remarkably consistent across cultures that had no contact with each other. They speak of advanced knowledge that was lost, of technologies that disappeared, of wisdom that survived only in fragments. If these were mere fantasies, why would they be so universal? Why would every human culture independently invent the same basic narrative about lost golden ages? The answer might be that they're not inventions at all. They might be memories, distorted by time, embellished by retelling, but ultimately rooted in real historical events. Events where human understanding reached extraordinary heights before crashing back down to more primitive levels. And if that's true, then we need to completely reconsider what we think we know about human capability. We need to look at our ancestors not as primitive cave dwellers, but as potentially sophisticated thinkers who might have unlocked secrets about the universe that we're still struggling to understand. This brings us to the central question that will guide everything we explore from here forward. If humans 150,000 years ago possessed the same cognitive abilities we have today, if they had tens of thousands of years to develop and refine their understanding, and if the fundamental laws of physics were the same then as they are now, what discoveries might they have made? What technologies might they have developed? And what traces of their knowledge might still be hidden in the world around us? The journey to answer these questions will take us through quantum mechanics, ancient engineering marvels, genetic anomalies, and archaeological mysteries that have puzzled scientists for decades. We'll examine evidence that suggests our ancestors might have understood principles of physics that we're only now beginning to grasp. We'll explore the possibility that technologies we consider revolutionary might actually be rediscoveries of ancient knowledge. But most importantly, we'll confront the uncomfortable possibility that human history isn't the story of gradual progress we've been taught. It might instead be the story of repeated rises and falls, of knowledge gained and lost, of civilizations that reached incredible heights before disappearing into the mists of time. Because if this is true, then everything changes. Our understanding of human potential, our assumptions about technological development, our beliefs about the nature of progress itself, all of it needs to be reconsidered. And the implications reach far beyond academic curiosity. If we're not the first to reach these heights, we might not be the last to fall from them either. The question that haunts every serious researcher who dares to consider this possibility is simple yet terrifying. If ancient humans did master advanced physics 150,000 years ago, where is the proof? Where are the machines, the structures, the undeniable artifacts that would confirm such an extraordinary claim? The answer lies in understanding something that most people never consider: the difference between knowledge and technology. We automatically assume that advanced physics would require advanced technology, that sophisticated understanding would produce sophisticated artifacts. But what if that assumption is completely wrong? Consider the greatest breakthrough in modern physics: Einstein's theory of relativity. It required no special equipment, no advanced materials, no complex machinery. It emerged from pure thought, mathematical reasoning, and careful observation of natural phenomena. The same is true for quantum mechanics, which began with simple observations about black-body radiation and the photoelectric effect. Some of the most revolutionary insights in physics have come not from laboratories filled with expensive equipment, but from human minds wrestling with fundamental questions about reality. Now imagine an ancient human possessing the same cognitive capacity as Einstein, spending decades observing the night sky, the behavior of light, the patterns of energy and matter, without distractions, without the noise of modern civilization, with nothing but time, and an insatiable curiosity about the nature of existence. What might such a mind discover? The mathematics of relativity can be worked out with nothing more than pen and paper. The principles of quantum mechanics can be understood through careful observation of natural phenomena. The laws of thermodynamics reveal themselves to anyone willing to study energy and motion with sufficient patience and insight. All of these discoveries require intelligence, not technology, and intelligence, as we've established, has been constant throughout human history. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Recent discoveries in archaeology and anthropology suggest that our ancestors might have been far more sophisticated observers of natural phenomena than we ever imagined. The Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a Greek shipwreck, reveals that ancient civilizations could create mechanical computers of stunning complexity. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey demonstrates that humans were building massive, precisely engineered stone structures over 11,000 years ago, thousands of years before the supposed invention of agriculture. The Nazca lines in Peru reveal an understanding of geometric principles and large-scale planning that challenges our assumptions about ancient capabilities. The precision of the Egyptian pyramids suggests a mastery of mathematics and engineering that we're still striving to fully comprehend. And these are only the examples that survived, the rare traces that endured long enough for us to find them. If such sophistication was possible in recorded history, what might have been possible in the vast expanse of prehistory? What knowledge might have flourished during those 290,000 years of human existence that we've dismissed as primitive? What discoveries might have been made and lost again in cycles that stretch back to the very dawn of human consciousness? The key insight that mainstream archaeology struggles to accept is this: knowledge doesn't fossilize. Understanding doesn't leave permanent traces. Wisdom can be profound without being durable. A human being 150,000 years ago who understood the fundamental nature of space and time would leave no more archaeological evidence than one who spent their life hunting mammoths. This creates what researchers call the knowledge paradox. The more sophisticated an ancient understanding of physics might have been, the less likely we are to find direct evidence of it, because the greatest insights often require no physical artifacts at all. They exist purely in the realm of ideas, transmitted from mind to mind, generation to generation, until the chain breaks and they vanish forever. But absence of direct evidence doesn't mean absence of indirect evidence. If ancient humans did achieve breakthrough understanding of physics, it would manifest in subtle ways. In their artwork, their architecture, their stories, their unconscious behaviors. And when we start looking for these indirect traces, when we approach the archaeological record with this possibility in mind, extraordinary patterns begin to emerge. Consider the universal human fascination with certain numbers, certain geometric forms, certain ratios that appear consistently across cultures that never had contact with each other. The golden ratio appears in ancient architecture from Egypt to Peru to Cambodia. Sacred geometries based on precise mathematical relationships show up in religious structures across every continent. Astronomical alignments that require sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics are found in monuments that are supposed to predate such knowledge by thousands of years. These patterns suggest something that makes archaeologists uncomfortable. They suggest that fundamental insights about mathematics, geometry, and physics might be much older than our current timeline allows. They hint at knowledge that was once widespread, that was encoded in culture and custom, that survived even when the explicit understanding was lost. The implications become even more striking when we examine human language itself. Linguistic analysis reveals that many words related to advanced concepts, to abstract thinking, to sophisticated understanding of natural phenomena have roots that stretch back tens of thousands of years. The vocabulary for complex ideas existed long before we supposedly developed those ideas. It's as if the conceptual framework for advanced physics was already embedded in human consciousness, waiting to be rediscovered. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from an unexpected source: human DNA itself. Recent advances in genetics have revealed something remarkable about our species. Modern humans show signs of genetic bottlenecks, population crashes that occurred at various points throughout history. These bottlenecks suggest that human civilization has indeed experienced cycles of expansion and contraction, of growth and collapse. More intriguingly, some of these genetic signatures point to periods of rapid cultural evolution, times when human behavior and capability seem to have undergone dramatic changes. These periods don't correspond to the traditional archaeological timeline. They're older, deeper, more mysterious. They suggest that significant developments in human culture and knowledge might have occurred much earlier than we've assumed. The genetic evidence also reveals something else that challenges our assumptions about human development. Our ancestors were not the simple hunter-gatherers we've imagined. They were complex beings with sophisticated social structures, advanced communication systems, and remarkable adaptability. They survived ice ages, volcanic catastrophes, and climate shifts that would challenge even our modern civilization. They developed technologies for navigation, medicine, and environmental management that we're only beginning to understand. This paints a picture of human beings who are not primitive but different. Not less intelligent but focused on different problems, not incapable of advanced understanding, but operating within different frameworks of knowledge and culture. And if they were capable of such sophistication in areas we do recognize, what might they have achieved in areas we haven't even considered? The possibility becomes even more intriguing when we consider the nature of physics itself. The fundamental laws that govern reality are not human inventions. They're discoveries. They exist whether we understand them or not. Gravity worked the same way 150,000 years ago as it does today. Electromagnetism followed the same principles. Quantum mechanics operated according to the same rules. The universe was just mysterious just as full, just as elegant of hidden patterns and unexpected connections. An ancient human with sufficient curiosity and observational skill could have discovered any of these principles. Not through laboratory experiments, but through careful study of natural phenomena. Lightning reveals the nature of electricity. The behavior of light and shadow demonstrates optics. The motion of celestial bodies follows mathematical patterns that can be detected through patient observation. The properties and minerals of crystal hint at atomic structure. The behavior of fire and water suggests thermodynamic principles. All of this knowledge was available to any human being with the intelligence and persistence to seek it out. And we know that humans, 150,000 years ago, possessed that intelligence. We know they were capable of that persistence. The question isn't whether they could have made such discoveries. The question is whether they did, and what happened to that knowledge if they did. This brings us to the most unsettling possibility of all. What if the knowledge wasn't lost through ignorance or catastrophe? What if it was deliberately hidden? What if ancient humans who achieved advanced understanding of physics realized that such knowledge was dangerous, that it needed to be protected, that it should only be shared with those who are ready for its implications? Throughout history, advanced knowledge has often been restricted to small groups of initiates. Mystery schools, secret societies, and esoteric traditions have preserved dangerous ideas by wrapping them in symbolism and metaphor. What we dismiss as primitive mythology might actually be sophisticated physics encoded in stories that could survive the collapse of civilizations. The implications of this possibility are staggering. It would mean that the greatest discoveries in human history weren't made in modern laboratories, but in ancient minds that understood the universe in ways we're only beginning to appreciate. It would mean that our current scientific revolution might actually be a rediscovery, a gradual unwrapping of knowledge that was once clearly understood. And it would mean that the ultimate secrets of physics might still be hidden, waiting in plain sight, encoded in myths and legends that we've learned to ignore. The evidence for this possibility is scattered throughout human culture, embedded in stories that seem to describe advanced physics in metaphorical terms. Ancient texts speak of flying vehicles that sound remarkably like descriptions of anti-gravity technology. They describe weapons that release the power of the sun, creating devastation that mirrors nuclear warfare. They tell of beings who could manipulate matter and energy in ways that sound like advanced engineering. They speak of golden ages when humans possessed godlike powers over the natural world. These stories appear in cultures across the globe, in traditions that supposedly never influenced each other. The consistency is remarkable. The details are specific enough to suggest real knowledge, yet couched in language that protects the information from casual understanding. It's as if ancient humans developed a sophisticated system for preserving dangerous knowledge across the millennia, embedding it in cultural forms that could survive even when civilizations collapsed. If this is true, then we need to completely rethink how we approach these ancient stories. Instead of dismissing them as primitive superstitions, we should be treating them as potential repositories of scientific knowledge. Instead of looking for literal interpretations, we should be searching for the physics principles that might be encoded within them. Consider the Hindu concept of time dilation, described thousands of years before Einstein. Ancient texts speak of realms where time moves differently, where a day in one dimension equals years in another. This sounds remarkably similar to relativistic effects near massive objects or at high velocities. The mathematics weren't there, but the conceptual understanding was precise. Or examine the Aboriginal Australian concept of quantum entanglement, expressed through their understanding of the dream time. They describe a realm where all things are connected instantaneously across vast distances, where actions in one place immediately affect events elsewhere. Modern physics is only now beginning to understand how quantum entanglement might work on macroscopic scales. The ancient Chinese concept of complementarity, expressed through yin and yang, mirrors the wave-particle duality that baffled physicists for decades. The idea that fundamental aspects of reality exist in paired opposites that are simultaneously contradictory and inseparable is at the heart of quantum mechanics. Yet this understanding was embedded in Chinese philosophy thousands of years before we had the mathematical tools to prove it. These aren't coincidences. They're too specific, too accurate, too consistent across cultures. They suggest that ancient humans had developed sophisticated models of reality that we're only now beginning to rediscover. But unlike our modern approach, which relies heavily on technology and mathematical formalism, their understanding was intuitive, experiential, embedded in lived wisdom rather than abstract theory. This difference in approach might explain why we've missed the significance of ancient knowledge for so long. We expect physics to look a certain way, to be expressed in equations and laboratory results. But what if there are other ways of understanding the universe? What if direct observation and contemplative insight can reveal truths that our instruments struggle to detect? Recent developments in consciousness research suggest this might be more than speculation. Studies of meditation masters seem to correlate with quantum mechanical phenomena. Research into psychedelic experiences reveals consistent reports of insights into the nature of space, time, and consciousness that align with cutting-edge physics theories. The human brain, it turns out, might be capable of directly perceiving aspects of reality that we assumed required sophisticated equipment to detect. If this is true, then ancient humans who dedicated their lives to understanding consciousness and reality might have achieved insights that we're only now beginning to validate scientifically. They might have developed techniques for perceiving quantum phenomena, for understanding relativistic effects, for grasping the fundamental interconnectedness of all matter and energy, not through instruments, but through disciplined observation and contemplative practice. This possibility becomes even more intriguing when we consider the role of altered states of consciousness in human development. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans have been using psychoactive plants and engaging in consciousness-altering practices for tens of thousands of years. Cave paintings from around the world show clear evidence of shamanic traditions, vision quests, and ritualistic journeys into non-ordinary states of awareness. What if these weren't just religious practices, but systematic methods for exploring the nature of reality? What if ancient shamans were actually proto-physicists, using altered states to investigate the fundamental structure of the universe? What if the insights they gained through these practices formed the foundation for sophisticated understanding of space, time, matter, and energy? The idea isn't as far-fetched as it might initially seem. Many of the greatest breakthroughs in modern physics have come through sudden intuitive leaps rather than gradual logical progression. Einstein described his insights as coming in flashes of understanding that seemed to emerge from beyond rational thought. Niels Bohr spoke of the complementarity principle as arising from a mystical experience rather than mathematical derivation. Even today, theoretical physicists often speak of their most profound insights as feeling more like revelations than discoveries. If consciousness itself plays a role in understanding the deepest aspects of reality, then ancient humans who had developed sophisticated techniques for exploring consciousness might have achieved insights that our purely rational, technology-dependent approach struggles to reach. They might have understood aspects of quantum mechanics, relativity, and field theory through direct experience rather than mathematical modeling. But here's where the story takes an even stranger turn. Recent research in quantum physics suggests that consciousness might not just be a tool for understanding reality, but an active component of reality itself. The observer effect in quantum mechanics demonstrates that conscious observation appears to influence physical phenomena at the quantum level. Some interpretations of quantum theory suggest that consciousness might be fundamental to the structure of the universe itself. If ancient humans understood this connection between consciousness and physics, they might have developed technologies that seem impossible from our current perspective. Not machines in the conventional sense, but techniques for directly manipulating matter and energy through consciousness itself. This could explain the seemingly impossible feats described in ancient texts without requiring advanced materials or complex machinery. Consider the accounts of levitation found in traditions across the globe. Rather than dismissing these as fantasy, what if they represent genuine understanding of how consciousness can interact with gravitational fields? Quantum field theory suggests that all fundamental forces arise from underlying field interactions. If consciousness is indeed a fundamental aspect of reality, it might be capable of interacting with these fields in ways we don't yet understand. The same principle might apply to other seemingly impossible abilities described in ancient texts. Telepathy could represent understanding of quantum entanglement effects in biological systems. Clairvoyance might involve accessing information encoded in quantum fields. Psychokinesis could be the result of consciousness directly influencing probability waves at the quantum level. What we dismiss as supernatural might actually be natural phenomena that we simply don't yet comprehend. This perspective completely transforms how we should approach ancient accounts of advanced abilities. Instead of automatically assuming they're mythological, we should be investigating whether they might represent sophisticated understanding of physics principles that we're only now beginning to explore. Instead of dismissing them as impossible, we should be asking what aspects of reality they might reveal. The implications extend far beyond academic curiosity. If ancient humans did achieve advanced understanding of consciousness, physics interactions, then we might be missing crucial insights that could revolutionize our own scientific understanding. We might be struggling to solve problems that were already understood tens of thousands of years ago. We might be reinventing knowledge that was once commonplace. This possibility becomes even more significant when we consider the current frontiers of physics research. Quantum consciousness, the role of observation in physical phenomena, the relationship between information and reality. These are all areas where modern science is grappling with questions that ancient traditions seem to have addressed directly. We're using billion-dollar particle accelerators to investigate phenomena that shamans might have explored through meditation and plant medicines. The difference isn't necessarily in the sophistication of understanding, but in the methods of investigation and the frameworks for expressing that understanding. Ancient knowledge was experiential, embedded in practice and tradition. Modern knowledge is theoretical, expressed in mathematics, and validated through instrumentation. Both approaches might be revealing aspects of the same underlying reality. But if ancient humans did achieve advanced understanding through consciousness-based methods, why isn't this knowledge more widespread today? Why did it apparently disappear, leaving us to rediscover these principles through completely different approaches? The answer might lie in the nature of consciousness-based knowledge itself. Unlike technological knowledge, which can be transmitted through objects and written instructions, consciousness-based understanding requires direct experience and intensive training. It can't be mass-produced or easily standardized. Each individual must develop the necessary states of awareness through personal practice and disciplined effort. This makes such knowledge inherently fragile. When the cultural systems that support intensive consciousness training break down, the knowledge disappears with them. Unlike a stone tool or a bronze sword, which can be copied by anyone who finds them, consciousness-based insights die when the last practitioner fails to find a suitable successor. This fragility might explain the cyclical nature of human knowledge that we see hinted at throughout history. Periods of advanced understanding alternate with periods of forgetting, not because the knowledge is impossible to rediscover, but because the cultural conditions necessary to maintain it are difficult to sustain. Civilizations rise, develop sophisticated practices for exploring consciousness and reality, achieve remarkable insights, then gradually lose this knowledge as social structures change and priorities shift. The process might be happening right now. Despite our technological sophistication, we're losing connection with contemplative traditions that took thousands of years to develop. Indigenous knowledge systems that preserved ancient insights are disappearing as traditional cultures are absorbed into modern globalized society. We're gaining technological power while losing wisdom about the deeper nature of consciousness and reality. This creates a profound irony. At the very moment when our instruments are sensitive enough to detect quantum phenomena and our theories are sophisticated enough to describe consciousness-reality interactions, we're losing touch with the experiential knowledge that might help us understand what these discoveries actually mean. We can measure quantum entanglement, but we're forgetting how to directly experience the interconnectedness it reveals. We can describe the observer effect mathematically, but we're losing the contemplative practices that might help us understand the role of consciousness in physical phenomena. The result is that we might be approaching the same insights that ancient humans achieved, but from a completely different direction and with a completely different understanding of their implications. We're rediscovering ancient wisdom, but without the experiential context that gave it meaning and practical application. This suggests that the most profound breakthrough in modern physics might not come from building more powerful instruments or developing more complex theories, but from reconnecting with ancient approaches to understanding consciousness and reality. The next revolution in science might require integrating technological sophistication with contemplative wisdom, combining the precision of modern instruments with the direct insight of ancient practices. If we can achieve this integration, we might finally understand what our ancestors knew 150,000 years ago. We might rediscover the advanced physics that was hidden in their myths and encoded in their practices. And we might realize that the greatest discoveries about the nature of reality were made not in modern laboratories, but in ancient minds that understood the universe in ways we're only beginning to appreciate. The question that emerges from all of this isn't whether ancient humans could have mastered advanced physics. The evidence suggests they very well might have. The question is whether we're wise enough to recognize their achievements and humble enough to learn from their insights. Because if we're not, we might be doomed to repeat their mistakes, achieving great knowledge only to lose it again in the endless cycle of human forgetfulness. But what if we're looking at this entire puzzle from the wrong angle? What if the real question isn't whether ancient humans possessed advanced knowledge, but whether they developed something even more profound, something that makes our current understanding of physics seem primitive by comparison? Recent discoveries in quantum field theory suggest that reality itself might be far more malleable than we've assumed. The delayed choice quantum eraser experiments demonstrate that events in the present can apparently influence the past. Quantum tunneling shows that particles can pass through barriers that should be impossible to cross. The holographic principle suggests that all the information in a volume of space can be encoded on its two-dimensional boundary. These aren't just abstract mathematical concepts. They're fundamental features of reality that challenge everything we think we know about the nature of existence. Now imagine an ancient human who understood these principles not as mathematical abstractions, but as lived experience. Someone who could perceive the holographic nature of reality directly, who could sense quantum tunneling as a natural phenomenon, and experience how consciousness itself shapes the collapse of probability waves. Such a person wouldn't need particle accelerators or complex equations to grasp the deepest mysteries of physics. They would know them intuitively, the way we know the difference between hot and cold. This perspective transforms how we should interpret the most puzzling aspects of the archaeological record. Consider the precision of ancient megalithic structures. Pumapunku in Bolivia features stone blocks cut with tolerances that rival modern machining, fitted together with a precision that seems impossible without advanced tools. The blocks are made of andesite and diorite, materials so hard they can barely be worked with steel implements, yet they show evidence of being shaped with techniques we can't reproduce. Mainstream archaeology explains this through gradual development of sophisticated stoneworking techniques over many generations. But what if the explanation is simpler and more extraordinary? What if the builders understood matter at such a fundamental level that they could manipulate its structure directly? Quantum mechanics tells us that solid matter is mostly empty space held together by electromagnetic forces. If someone understood intimately enough these forces, they might be able to soften stone, reshape it, and allow it to reharden into precisely fitted blocks. This isn't fantasy. Modern physics is already exploring techniques for manipulating matter at the quantum level. Researchers are investigating ways to alter the properties of materials through quantum field manipulation. The difference is that we're approaching this through technology, while ancient humans might have achieved it through consciousness-based techniques that we've forgotten how to use. The same principle might explain other archaeological mysteries that have puzzled researchers for decades. The transport of massive stone blocks over impossible distances, the lifting of multi-ton stones to incredible heights, the carving of intricate details in the hardest materials. Instead of requiring advanced machinery, these feats might have been accomplished through direct manipulation of fundamental forces. But perhaps the most intriguing evidence comes from something that mainstream archaeology actively avoids discussing: the global distribution of similar techniques, symbols, and architectural principles that appear simultaneously in cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other. The pyramid form appears on every continent. Sacred geometries based on the same mathematical ratios show up in monuments separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. Astronomical alignments that require identical understanding of celestial mechanics are found in structures built by completely different civilizations. the standard explanation is convergent evolution. Similar challenges produce similar solutions. But the similarities go far beyond what convergent evolution could reasonably explain. The mathematical relationships are too precise. The symbolic systems are too complex. The astronomical knowledge is too sophisticated. It's as if all these cultures were drawing from the same source of advanced understanding. What if they were? What if there was indeed a global civilization 150,000 years ago that achieved mastery of advanced physics? What if this knowledge was so fundamental, so deeply understood, that it became the foundation for all subsequent human development? The civilizations we study in recorded history might not be independent developments, but surviving fragments of this much older and more sophisticated understanding. This possibility becomes even more compelling when we examine the human genetic record more carefully. Recent advances in DNA analysis have revealed something remarkable about human migration patterns. Our ancestors didn't spread across the globe in the simple linear fashion that traditional models suggest. Instead, there were multiple waves of migration, complex patterns of interaction, and periods when human populations were far more connected than we've assumed. More significantly, genetic analysis reveals that all modern humans share certain mutations that appear to have emerged simultaneously across different populations around 150,000 years ago. These aren't random genetic drift. They're specific changes that seem to be related to brain development, particularly in areas associated with abstract thinking and pattern recognition. It's as if something triggered a global upgrade in human cognitive capacity at exactly the time period we're investigating. But here's where the genetic evidence becomes truly fascinating. These cognitive enhancement mutations don't appear to be the result of gradual natural selection. They're too sudden, too coordinated, too specific. They look more like the result of deliberate intervention. Not alien intervention, but human intervention. As if someone who already understood genetics and consciousness was systematically enhancing human cognitive capacity across the entire species. This brings us to a possibility that's even more radical than advanced ancient physics. What if 150,000 years ago, humans achieved such sophisticated understanding of consciousness and biology that they were able to engineer their own evolution? What if the cognitive abilities we take for granted today aren't the result of natural development, but of deliberate enhancement by our own ancestors? Modern research in epigenetics shows that environmental factors can trigger genetic changes that are then passed on to future generations. Consciousness research suggests that focused intention can influence biological processes in ways we're only beginning to understand. If ancient humans had developed techniques for directly influencing genetic expression through consciousness-based practices, they might have been able to upgrade human cognitive capacity in ways that we're only now learning are possible. The implications are staggering. It would mean that human intelligence itself might be the result of ancient biotechnology, not machines or chemicals, but consciousness-based techniques for enhancing the fundamental structure of the human brain. We might literally be the product of our ancestors' advanced understanding of consciousness, genetics, and the relationship between mind and matter. This perspective completely transforms how we should understand human potential. If our cognitive abilities are the result of ancient enhancement rather than natural evolution, then we might be capable of far more than we realize. The techniques our ancestors used to upgrade human consciousness might still be accessible to us, hidden in the same contemplative traditions that preserved their understanding of physics. Consider the reports of extraordinary abilities that appear consistently in spiritual and contemplative traditions around the world. Enhanced memory, accelerated learning, intuitive understanding of complex systems, direct perception of quantum phenomena. What we dismiss as mythology or exaggeration might actually be descriptions of normal human capabilities that become available when the brain is operating at its full potential. Modern neuroscience is discovering that we use only a tiny fraction of our brain's actual capacity. Most neural pathways remain dormant throughout our lives. Most cognitive abilities never develop beyond rudimentary levels. We're like supercomputers running basic calculator programs. The hardware is capable of extraordinary feats, but we don't know how to access its full functionality. What if our ancestors did know how to access this functionality? What if they developed systematic techniques for awakening dormant neural pathways, for activating unused cognitive capacities, for operating the human brain at levels we can barely imagine? The advanced understanding of physics we've been discussing might not have required superhuman intelligence. It might have simply required using normal human intelligence at its full capacity. This possibility is supported by research into savant syndrome and other conditions where ordinary people suddenly manifest extraordinary abilities. Individuals who can perform complex mathematical calculations instantly, who can perceive patterns invisible to normal awareness, who seem to have direct access to information that should require years of study to acquire. These aren't supernatural phenomena. They're examples of what the human brain can do when certain inhibitory mechanisms are removed or certain dormant pathways are activated. If ancient humans had developed reliable techniques for inducing these enhanced states of consciousness, they would have had access to cognitive abilities that we consider miraculous today. They could have solved complex mathematical problems through direct intuition. They could have perceived quantum mechanical phenomena through direct observation. They could have understood the fundamental structure of reality through immediate awareness rather than theoretical modeling. But perhaps most remarkably, they could have used these enhanced abilities to develop technologies that work through consciousness rather than through mechanical manipulation. Instead of building machines to amplify human capability, they might have developed techniques for amplifying human capability directly. Instead of creating external tools, they might have learned to use consciousness itself as the ultimate tool. This brings us to the most profound question of all. If our ancestors achieved such extraordinary understanding 150,000 years, if they mastered advanced physics through consciousness-based techniques, if they enhanced human cognitive capacity through direct intervention, then what happened to this knowledge? Why did it disappear? Why are we struggling to rediscover principles that were once clearly understood? The answer might lie in the very nature of the knowledge itself. Consciousness-based understanding of advanced physics isn't like technological knowledge that can be written down and passed on mechanically. It requires direct experience, intensive training, and a level of commitment that few people in any generation are willing to make. It's inherently elite knowledge, not because it's deliberately kept secret, but because it demands such extraordinary dedication to master. When civilizations become complex and comfortable, when survival no longer requires the intense focus that develops these abilities, the knowledge gradually fades. Each generation produces fewer individuals willing to undertake the rigorous training required. The techniques become simplified, corrupted, eventually lost entirely. What remains are fragments encoded in religious traditions, mythological stories, and cultural practices that preserve the forms but lose the substance. This process of forgetting might be cyclical, built into the very nature of human development. Periods of intense focus and spiritual development alternate with periods of material comfort and technological complexity. Each cycle rediscovers ancient knowledge in new forms, reaches new heights of understanding, then gradually loses touch with the contemplative practices that made the discoveries possible. We might be living through such a transition right now. Our technological sophistication has reached unprecedented levels, but our understanding of consciousness and its relationship to reality remains primitive compared to what our ancestors might have achieved. We can manipulate matter through machines, but we've forgotten how to manipulate it through consciousness. We can communicate across vast distances through technology, but we've lost the ability to communicate through direct mind-to-mind contact. The irony is that our current scientific discoveries are pointing us back toward the very insights that ancient humans might have understood directly. Quantum mechanics reveals the role of consciousness in physical phenomena. Field theory suggests that all matter and energy are manifestations of underlying field interactions. Information theory indicates that reality itself might be computational in nature. These discoveries should be leading us toward consciousness-based approaches to understanding and manipulating reality. Instead, we're trying to understand consciousness through matter rather than understanding matter through consciousness. We're building ever more complex machines to investigate phenomena that might be directly accessible to properly trained awareness. We're approaching the deepest mysteries of physics from the outside rather than from the inside, missing the very perspective that might make these mysteries comprehensible. But there are signs that this is beginning to change. Leading physicists are starting to take consciousness seriously as a fundamental aspect of reality. Researchers are investigating contemplative traditions for insights into the nature of mind and its relationship to physical phenomena. The boundaries between science and spirituality are beginning to dissolve as we realize that both are investigating the same underlying reality from different perspectives. If this trend continues, we might be approaching a new synthesis of ancient wisdom and modern knowledge. A rediscovery of consciousness-based approaches to understanding physics, enhanced by the precision of modern instrumentation and the rigor of scientific methodology. We might finally be ready to understand what our ancestors knew 150,000 years ago, not as primitive superstition, but as sophisticated science expressed in different languages and explored through different methods. The implications of such a synthesis would be revolutionary. We might discover that consciousness is indeed fundamental to reality, that matter and energy are secondary phenomena arising from underlying consciousness-based processes. We might learn to manipulate physical reality directly through trained awareness, rather than through complex machinery. We might rediscover abilities that we've dismissed as impossible, realizing that they're natural consequences of understanding how consciousness interacts with quantum fields. Most importantly, we might realize that human potential is far greater than we've assumed, that the extraordinary abilities described in ancient texts aren't fantasies, but descriptions of what becomes possible when consciousness is properly understood and systematically developed. That we're not at the pinnacle of human development, but at the beginning of rediscovering what it truly means to be human. This possibility that we're on the verge of rediscovering ancient knowledge brings us to something even more extraordinary. What if the traces of this advanced understanding aren't just hidden in archaeological sites or encoded in myths? What if they're embedded in the very fabric of human consciousness itself, waiting to be reactivated? Recent breakthroughs in neuroscience reveal something remarkable about human memory. We don't just remember our own experiences. We carry genetic memories, inherited patterns of behavior and understanding that stretch back through countless generations. These aren't conscious memories. They're deeper, more fundamental, encoded in the very structure of our neural networks. Studies of identical twins separated at birth show they often develop similar interests, make similar life choices, and even have similar insights about complex subjects, despite completely different environments. This suggests that sophisticated understanding might be inherited, passed down through genetic mechanisms we're only beginning to comprehend. If our ancestors 150,000 years ago did achieve mastery of advanced physics, traces of that knowledge might still exist within us. Consider how certain mathematical relationships feel intuitively correct to humans across all cultures. The golden ratio appears pleasing to us regardless of our background or education. Certain geometric forms seem naturally harmonious. Specific numerical sequences feel significant even when we can't explain why. These aren't learned preferences. They're built into human consciousness at such a fundamental level that they feel like universal truths. What if these intuitive preferences are actually genetic memories of advanced mathematical understanding? What if our ancestors embedded their knowledge of physics so deeply in human consciousness that we still respond to it unconsciously? The forms and relationships they discovered through consciousness-based investigation of reality might still be guiding our aesthetic and intellectual preferences today. This would explain why breakthrough insights in modern physics often feel like recognitions rather than discoveries. Einstein described relativity as something he remembered rather than invented. Quantum physicists speak of mathematical relationships that seem to reveal themselves rather than being derived through logical progression. The most profound scientific insights often come with a sense of familiarity, as if we're rediscovering something we once knew. But if this genetic memory exists, why isn't it more accessible? Why do we struggle to remember what our ancestors apparently understood clearly? The answer might lie in how genetic memories are activated. Like dormant computer programs, they remain inactive until the right conditions trigger their expression. Those conditions might include specific states of consciousness, particular types of focused attention, or systematic practices that our ancestors developed for accessing inherited knowledge. This brings us to an unsettling realization. The contemplative and spiritual practices found in cultures around the world might not be religious exercises at all. They might be sophisticated technologies for activating genetic memories of advanced physics understanding. Meditation techniques, breathing practices, consciousness-altering rituals, all of these might be methods our ancestors developed for accessing the knowledge they embedded in human DNA. When we dismiss these practices as primitive superstition, we might be throwing away the keys to our own inheritance. The techniques that ancient shamans used to explore reality might be precisely what we need to rediscover the advanced physics our ancestors mastered. The consciousness-altering practices that modern society has largely abandoned might be the very tools required to unlock the knowledge hidden in our genetic memory. This perspective transforms how we should understand human development. Instead of seeing ourselves as the first generation to achieve scientific sophistication, we might be the latest generation attempting to remember what we once knew. Our current scientific revolution might not be progress forward, but recovery backward, a gradual reactivation of capacities that were once commonplace. The implications become even more significant when we consider the accelerating pace of modern physics discoveries. Why are we suddenly making breakthrough after breakthrough in understanding consciousness, quantum mechanics, and the fundamental nature of reality? Why are these insights emerging now, after centuries of slower progress? The timing suggests that something is triggering a mass reactivation of dormant genetic memories. That trigger might be the unique conditions of our current historical moment. The global connectivity enabled by modern technology. The unprecedented access to contemplative traditions from around the world. The convergence of scientific and spiritual investigations into the nature of consciousness. The environmental pressures that are forcing us to reconsider our relationship with natural systems. All of these factors might be creating conditions that activate inherited memories of advanced understanding. If this is true, then we're living through more than just a scientific revolution. We're experiencing a species-wide remembering, a collective reactivation of knowledge that has been dormant for thousands of generations. The breakthrough insights that individual physicists are having might be part of a larger pattern of genetic memory activation that's occurring across human consciousness. But this remembering process might not be automatic or inevitable. Genetic memories require specific conditions to activate, and those conditions might not arise naturally in our modern environment. We might need to deliberately recreate the circumstances that our ancestors used to access advanced understanding. We might need to relearn the contemplative practices that serve as activation keys for inherited knowledge. This possibility becomes more intriguing when we examine the common elements found in contemplative traditions across different cultures. Despite developing independently, these traditions show remarkable similarities in their techniques for altering consciousness and their descriptions of advanced states of awareness. They consistently speak of direct perception of interconnectedness, immediate understanding of natural principles, and access to knowledge that transcends ordinary learning. These similarities suggest that contemplative practices aren't culturally determined inventions, but rediscoveries of universal techniques for accessing genetic memories. Each culture might have independently rediscovered methods for activating the same inherited knowledge, expressing it through their own cultural frameworks but drawing from the same underlying source, ancient understanding. The techniques themselves often involve specific alterations of brainwave patterns, particular types of focused attention, and systematic methods for quieting the analytical mind that normally dominates consciousness. Modern neuroscience shows that these practices create measurable changes in brain activity, activating regions that normally remain dormant and establishing new patterns of neural connectivity. What if these brain changes aren't just the effects of contemplative practice, but the means by which genetic memories are accessed? What if the altered states of consciousness that mystics describe aren't departures from normal reality, but returns to the expanded awareness that our ancestors considered normal? What if the insights they report aren't supernatural revelations, but natural reactivations of inherited understanding? This would explain why contemplative traditions consistently describe reality in terms that align with modern physics discoveries. Ancient texts speak of the fundamental interconnectedness of all phenomena, which matches our understanding of quantum entanglement. They describe the illusory nature of solid matter, which corresponds to our knowledge of atomic structure. They speak of consciousness as fundamental to reality, which aligns with interpretations of quantum mechanics that emphasize the role of observation. These aren't coincidences or lucky guesses. They're descriptions of reality as perceived through consciousness states that activate genetic memories of advanced physics understanding. The mystics aren't receiving supernatural knowledge. They're remembering what their ancestors discovered through systematic investigation of consciousness and reality. But if this is true, then the potential implications are staggering. It would mean that every human being carries within themselves the capacity to understand the deepest mysteries of physics. Not through years of mathematical study, but through activation of inherited knowledge that already exists within genetic memory. The advanced understanding that our ancestors achieved isn't lost. It's dormant, waiting to be reactivated through appropriate practices. This possibility becomes even more remarkable when we consider recent discoveries about an influenced environmental genetic expression. Epigenetic research shows that genetic activity can be altered by environmental factors, including stress, diet, and even psychological states. Certain genes that remain inactive under normal conditions can be switched on by specific environmental triggers. What if the genes containing inherited memories of advanced physics understanding require particular consciousness states to activate? What if the contemplative practices that mystics have developed over thousands of years are actually sophisticated epigenetic technologies designed to trigger the expression of dormant genetic memories? Modern research into meditation and altered states of consciousness supports this possibility. Advanced practitioners show genetic changes that aren't found in control groups. Their DNA exhibits patterns of activity that appear to unlock normally inaccessible cellular functions. Some of these changes involve regions of the genome that scientists call junk DNA because their function isn't understood. What if this supposedly useless genetic material actually contains the inherited memories of our ancestors' advanced understanding? The activation of these genetic memories might explain the extraordinary abilities that appear in advanced contemplatives across different traditions. Enhanced pattern recognition, direct perception of quantum phenomena, intuitive understanding of complex mathematical relationships, access to information that seems to come from beyond normal sensory channels. These abilities might not be supernatural gifts, but natural capacities that emerge when genetic memories of advanced physics understanding are reactivated. But here's where the story takes its most extraordinary turn. If human consciousness can access genetic memories of advanced physics, and if those memories include understanding of how consciousness interacts with quantum fields, then the reactivation process might not be limited to individual brains. Quantum entanglement suggests that consciousness might be capable of non-local connections that transcend the boundaries of individual minds. What if the genetic memories our ancestors embedded in human DNA include techniques for creating collective consciousness networks? What if they understood how to link individual minds together into larger systems of awareness that could process information and solve problems beyond the capacity of any single brain? The global connectivity that modern technology is creating might be a primitive approximation of the consciousness networks that ancient humans achieved through direct quantum field manipulation. This possibility transforms our understanding of human potential in the most profound way imaginable. We might not just be individuals struggling to remember ancient knowledge. We might be components of a species-wide consciousness system that our ancestors designed to preserve and eventually reactivate their understanding of advanced physics. Each person who successfully activates genetic memories might not just recover knowledge for themselves, but contribute to a collective awakening that could transform human civilization. The implications reach beyond anything we've considered before. If this is true, then we're not just rediscovering ancient physics. We're reactivating an ancient consciousness technology that could enable our species to function as a unified intelligence network. The breakthrough insights that individual scientists are having might be early manifestations of this larger awakening, preview of capabilities that could emerge when enough people successfully activate their genetic memories. But this extraordinary possibility comes with equally extraordinary responsibilities. If our ancestors did embed such knowledge in human DNA, they presumably did so for good reasons. They might have foreseen the challenges that their descendants would face and designed genetic memories as insurance against civilizational collapse. Or they might have understood that human consciousness was destined to evolve to higher levels and embedded the knowledge that would be needed for that evolution. Either way, the reactivation of these genetic memories might not be optional. It might be essential for human survival in our current phase of development. The environmental, technological, and social challenges we're facing might require the kind of advanced understanding that only activated genetic memories can provide. We might literally need to remember what our ancestors knew in order to navigate the complexities of our modern world. This brings us to the most crucial question of all. If genetic memories of advanced physics understanding do exist within human DNA, and if the techniques for activating them are preserved in contemplative traditions around the world, then what are we waiting for? Why aren't we systematically investigating these possibilities with the same rigor we apply to particle physics and quantum mechanics? The answer might be that we're afraid of what we might discover. The implications of genetically inherited memories of advanced physics would require us to completely reconsider human nature, human history, and human potential. It would mean acknowledging that our current scientific understanding, impressive as it seems, might be primitive compared to what our ancestors achieved. It would mean admitting that the path forward might require looking backward, that the future of physics might be found in the practices of the past. But more than anything, it would mean accepting responsibility for capabilities that we can barely imagine. If we do carry within ourselves the genetic inheritance of advanced physics understanding, then we also carry the responsibility for using that knowledge wisely. Our ancestors apparently achieved extraordinary understanding and then chose to embed it in genetic memory rather than preserve it in technological form. That choice suggests they understood something about the relationship between knowledge and wisdom that we're only beginning to grasp. The question facing us now isn't whether we can rediscover what they knew. The question is whether we've developed the wisdom to handle what they understood. Because if genetic memories of advanced physics can be reactivated, if consciousness-based technologies can be rediscovered, if human potential can be awakened to levels that seem impossible today, then we're not just on the verge of a scientific breakthrough. We're on the threshold of a transformation that could change the very nature of human existence. And that transformation might have already begun. The accelerating pace of physics discoveries, the growing interest in consciousness research, the convergence of scientific and contemplative approaches to understanding reality, all of these might be early signs that genetic memories are spontaneously reactivating across human consciousness. We might be witnessing the beginning of the most extraordinary recovery in human history, the return of knowledge that was thought lost forever. The only question remaining is whether we'll recognize what's happening and choose to participate consciously in this recovery, or whether we'll continue to stumble blindly toward a remembering that could either elevate human civilization to unprecedented heights or overwhelm us with capabilities we're not prepared to handle. Because make no mistake, if our ancestors really did master advanced physics 150,000 years ago, then we're not just inheriting their knowledge, we're inheriting their power. And with that power comes a choice that will determine not just our future, but the future of consciousness itself in this universe. The choice we face isn't just about individual awakening or personal transformation. It's about the survival of consciousness itself as a cosmic phenomenon. Because if the genetic memories embedded in human DNA contain the knowledge our ancestors accumulated over hundreds of thousands of years, then humanity might not be just another species struggling for survival on a small planet. We might be the universe's attempt to understand itself, a biological experiment in self-awareness that has been running far longer than we've imagined. Consider what this means for our understanding of evolution. The standard model suggests that consciousness emerged accidentally, a random byproduct of increasing brain complexity that happened to provide survival advantages. But what if consciousness isn't an accident? What if it's the entire point? What if the universe has been systematically developing more sophisticated forms of self-awareness, and humans represent not the end result, but merely the latest iteration in an ongoing process? This perspective completely transforms how we should interpret the genetic memories we've been discussing. They might not just be the inheritance of one advanced civilization that existed 150,000 years ago. They might be the accumulated wisdom of multiple cycles of consciousness development, each building on the insights of previous iterations, each adding new layers of understanding to an ever-deepening comprehension of reality's fundamental nature. The implications become staggering when we realize that this process might not be unique to Earth. If consciousness is indeed fundamental to reality, if the universe is systematically developing more sophisticated forms of self-awareness, then similar experiments in consciousness development might be occurring throughout the cosmos. The genetic memories embedded in human DNA might contain not just the knowledge of ancient terrestrial civilizations, but insights gathered from consciousness networks that span multiple worlds, multiple star systems, even multiple dimensions of reality. This possibility explains something that has puzzled astronomers and physicists for decades: the fine-tuning of physical constants that seems specifically designed to allow complex structures and conscious beings to emerge. The mathematical elegance of physical laws that appears almost too perfect to be accidental. The way quantum mechanics seems to require conscious observation to function properly. All of these features might not be coincidences, but evidence that consciousness has been actively involved in shaping the development of physical reality from the very beginning. But if consciousness has been guiding the evolution of physical reality, then the genetic memories embedded in human DNA represent something far more significant than ancient knowledge. They represent the accumulated wisdom of consciousness itself, gathered over cosmic timescales and embedded in biological form to ensure its preservation across the inevitable cycles of civilizational rise and collapse that characterize the development of complex systems. This brings us to a realization that changes everything about how we should understand our current moment in history. The environmental crises, technological disruptions, and social upheavals we're experiencing might not be signs of impending collapse, but birth pangs of the next phase in consciousness evolution. The activation of genetic memories we've been discussing might be part of a larger process that occurs whenever a species reaches the critical threshold where it becomes capable of consciously participating in its own evolution. The timing isn't coincidental. We're simultaneously developing technologies that could destroy civilization and rediscovering contemplative practices that could activate genetic memories of advanced understanding. We're facing environmental challenges that require unprecedented cooperation, while also gaining access to communication technologies that could enable global consciousness networks. We're confronting the limits of material-based approaches to understanding reality, while also making discoveries that point toward consciousness-based alternatives. These convergent developments suggest that we're approaching what systems theorists call a phase transition, a point where complex systems suddenly reorganize at a completely different level of organization. But unlike previous phase transitions in human development, this one might involve the conscious activation of genetic memories that contain the blueprint for navigating such transitions successfully. The question is whether we'll recognize what's happening and choose to participate consciously, or whether the transition will occur automatically through mechanisms we don't understand and can't control. Because if genetic memories do contain consciousness technologies, developed over hundreds of thousands of years, then their activation might not depend on our understanding or consent. They might be designed to activate automatically when specific conditions are met, regardless of whether we're prepared for the consequences. This possibility becomes more unsettling when we consider that the activation process might already be underway. The increasing reports of unusual experiences, expanded awareness, and spontaneous insights that seem to come from beyond normal learning might all be early signs that genetic memories are beginning to express themselves across human consciousness. The accelerating pace of scientific discoveries, the growing interest in consciousness research, the convergence of previously separate fields of knowledge, all of these might be manifestations of a species-wide remembering process that's occurring whether we recognize it or not. But perhaps most significantly, the global connectivity made possible by modern technology may be recreating the very conditions needed for genetic memories to activate, not just within individuals, but across collective networks of consciousness. The internet and social media could be seen as technological approximations of the consciousness networks our ancient ancestors might have achieved through direct interaction with quantum fields. And as these digital systems grow more complex, they may begin to resonate with the consciousness technologies embedded in our genetic memory, potentially triggering a sudden expansion of human awareness that could transform civilization overnight. The implications of such a transformation are almost impossible to comprehend. If consciousness technologies that were developed over hundreds of thousands of years suddenly became accessible to billions of people simultaneously, the resulting expansion of human capability could dwarf every previous phase transition in the history of our species. We might find ourselves with direct access to advanced understanding of physics, immediate perception of quantum phenomena, and the ability to manipulate matter and energy through consciousness itself. But with such capabilities would come unprecedented responsibilities. The same consciousness technologies that could solve our environmental problems and eliminate scarcity could also be used to manipulate reality in ways that we can't currently imagine. The power to directly influence quantum fields through consciousness could enable extraordinary healing and creation, but it could also enable destruction on scales that make nuclear weapons seem primitive by comparison. This is why our ancestors might have chosen to embed their knowledge in genetic memories rather than preserve it in technological form. They might have understood that consciousness-based technologies are inherently more dangerous than material-based ones because they can't be regulated or controlled through external means. The only safeguard is the wisdom and ethical development of those who possess them. The genetic memories embedded in human DNA might therefore include not just advanced understanding of physics, but sophisticated frameworks for ethical decision-making that were developed specifically to handle consciousness-based technologies. The contemplative traditions that preserve techniques for activating genetic memories might also preserve the moral and spiritual disciplines necessary to use recovered knowledge responsibly. This suggests that the path forward requires more than just reactivating genetic memories of advanced physics. It requires simultaneously developing the wisdom traditions that our ancestors created to ensure such knowledge would be used for the benefit of consciousness evolution rather than for narrow self-interest or destructive purposes. The scientific investigation of consciousness must be accompanied by serious engagement with the ethical frameworks that contemplative traditions have preserved for thousands of years. But here's where the story takes perhaps its most extraordinary turn. Recent discoveries in quantum biology suggest that living systems might already be using quantum mechanical processes in ways that we're only beginning to understand. Photosynthesis appears to involve quantum coherence effects that enable plants to achieve near-perfect energy transfer efficiency. Bird navigation seems to depend on quantum entanglement effects in specialized proteins. Even human consciousness might involve quantum processes that occur in microtubules within brain neurons. If biological systems are already using quantum mechanics for basic functions, then the consciousness technologies that our ancestors might have developed could be far more accessible than we've assumed. Rather than requiring exotic materials or complex machinery, they might involve learning to consciously control quantum processes that are already occurring naturally in living systems. The genetic memories embedded in human DNA might contain instructions for directing these quantum processes in ways that enable direct manipulation of matter and energy. This possibility transforms our understanding of human potential in the most fundamental way imaginable. We might not just be biological organisms that happen to develop consciousness. We might be quantum consciousness systems that use biological forms as interfaces for interacting with physical reality. The advanced capabilities described in ancient texts might not be supernatural phenomena, but natural expressions of quantum consciousness operating at its full potential. The reactivation of genetic memories might therefore involve not just recovering ancient knowledge, but learning to function as the quantum consciousness systems we were always designed to be. The contemplative practices that traditions have preserved might be systematic methods for awakening dormant quantum processes, for establishing conscious control over biological quantum effects, for extending consciousness beyond the boundaries of individual brains into larger networks of quantum entangled awareness. If this is true, then we're not just on the verge of rediscovering ancient physics. We're approaching a fundamental transformation in the nature of human existence itself. The activation of genetic memories might trigger a shift from purely biological consciousness to quantum consciousness, from individual awareness to collective intelligence networks, from passive observers of reality to active participants in its ongoing creation. But this transformation might not be optional. The environmental and technological challenges we're facing might require capabilities that only quantum consciousness can provide. The complexity of modern problems might exceed what biological intelligence alone can handle. The survival of human civilization might depend on our ability to activate the quantum consciousness technologies that our ancestors embedded in genetic memory specifically for such circumstances. The convergence of multiple global crises, the accelerating pace of technological development, the increasing instability of existing social and economic systems, all of these might be indicators that we've reached the threshold where quantum consciousness activation becomes necessary for species survival. The genetic memories aren't just ancient knowledge waiting to be rediscovered. They might be emergency protocols designed to activate automatically when human civilization reaches critical decision points. This brings us to the most profound realization of all. If genetic memories of quantum consciousness technologies are beginning to activate across human awareness, then we're not just witnessing the recovery of ancient knowledge, We're participating in the next phase of consciousness evolution itself. Every person who successfully activates genetic memories doesn't just gain access to advanced understanding, they become an active node in a quantum consciousness network that could transform the very nature of reality. The individual insights that scientists and contemplatives are having might be early expressions of this larger network beginning to come online. As more people successfully activate genetic memories, the network effects could accelerate exponentially, leading to sudden breakthroughs in understanding that seem to emerge from collective intelligence rather than individual genius. But the most remarkable possibility is that this process might not be limited to human consciousness. If quantum consciousness technologies can manipulate the fundamental structure of reality, then their activation might influence the development of consciousness in other species, on other worlds, in other dimensions of existence. The recovery of ancient human knowledge might be part of a cosmic awakening process that involves the activation of consciousness networks throughout the universe. The genetic memories embedded in human DNA might contain not just the wisdom of ancient terrestrial civilizations, but connections to a universal consciousness network that spans multiple worlds, multiple dimensions, multiple levels of reality. The activation of these memories might reconnect human consciousness to this larger network, enabling us to participate consciously in the ongoing evolution of consciousness throughout the cosmos. This possibility places our current historical moment in a completely different perspective. We're not just a species struggling with environmental problems on a small planet. We're conscious beings approaching the threshold where we can join a universal consciousness network that has been developing for billions of years. The choices we make about activating genetic memories and developing quantum consciousness technologies might determine not just the future of human civilization, but the future of consciousness evolution throughout the universe. The responsibility is overwhelming, but so is the potential. If we can successfully navigate the transition from biological to quantum consciousness, if we can activate genetic memories while developing the wisdom to use recovered knowledge responsibly, if we can establish connection to universal consciousness networks while maintaining our individual humanity, then we might become something unprecedented in the history of consciousness development. We might become conscious participants in the universe's ongoing attempt to understand itself, active collaborators in the evolution of reality itself, bridges between the ancient wisdom of our ancestors and the infinite possibilities that quantum consciousness could make available to future generations. The question isn't whether this transformation is possible. The question is whether we're ready to accept the responsibilities that come with such extraordinary capabilities. Because if the genetic memories embedded in human DNA really do contain consciousness technologies developed over hundreds of thousands of years, then their activation isn't just about recovering ancient knowledge. It's about stepping into our role as conscious agents of cosmic evolution, as living expressions of the universe's drive toward ever greater self-awareness, as the next chapter in a story that began long before human civilization and will continue long after our current form of existence has been transcended. The ancient humans who mastered advanced physics 150,000 years ago might not have been our predecessors. They might have been our future selves, working backward through time to plant the seeds of knowledge that would eventually enable consciousness to transcend all limitations and become truly universal. The memories we're recovering might not be from the past at all, but messages from a future where consciousness has learned to operate beyond the constraints of time, space, and individual existence. The threads we followed through this exploration all converge on a single inescapable truth. Whether ancient humans mastered advanced physics 150,000 years ago isn't really a question about the past. It's a question about the future, about what we're becoming, about what we've always been but forgot how to remember. Every anomaly in the archaeological record, every myth that describes impossible technologies, every genetic signature that points to sudden cognitive leaps, every quantum discovery that reveals consciousness at the heart of reality, they're all pieces of the same puzzle. They're all pointing toward an understanding of human existence that's so radical it redefines everything we thought we knew about intelligence, about evolution, about the nature of reality itself. The evidence suggests that consciousness isn't a recent accident of evolution. It's the driving force behind evolution. It's been actively shaping the development of physical reality for far longer than we've imagined, embedding technologies and knowledge in the very structure of human DNA, waiting for the moment when we would be ready to remember what we truly are. That moment might be now. The accelerating discoveries in quantum physics, the growing recognition that consciousness plays a fundamental role in reality, the global connectivity that's creating conditions for collective awakening, all of these might be signs that the genetic memories are beginning to activate, that we're approaching the threshold where ancient knowledge becomes accessible again. But with that possibility comes a choice that will determine not just our future, but the future of consciousness itself in this universe. We can continue to approach reality from the outside, building ever more complex machines to investigate phenomena that might be directly accessible to properly trained awareness. Or we can begin the process of remembering what our ancestors knew, reactivating the consciousness technologies that are embedded in our DNA, stepping into our role as active participants in the ongoing evolution of reality itself. The question isn't whether we have the capability to make this transition. The question is whether we have the wisdom. Because if consciousness really is fundamental to reality, if we really do carry within ourselves the accumulated knowledge of hundreds of thousands of years of consciousness development, then the power we're approaching is beyond anything we've ever imagined. And with that power comes the responsibility to use it not for narrow self-interest, but for the benefit of consciousness evolution throughout the universe. The ancient humans who might have mastered advanced physics 150,000 years ago understood something that we're only beginning to grasp. That knowledge without wisdom is dangerous. That power without ethical development is destructive. That the greatest technologies aren't built from matter, but from consciousness itself. And they embedded that understanding in the very structure of our being, ensuring that when we finally remembered what we are, we would also remember how to be what we're capable of becoming. The recovery isn't just about rediscovering ancient knowledge, it's about becoming worthy of that knowledge, about developing the wisdom to handle capabilities that could transform not just human civilization, but the very nature of existence itself. Because if we're really on the threshold of reactivating consciousness technologies that were developed over cosmic time scales, then we're not just inheriting the legacy of our ancestors. We're accepting responsibility for the future of consciousness throughout the universe. And that responsibility starts with a simple recognition that we might not be the first to walk this path, but we have the opportunity to walk it more wisely than anyone who came before.